Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the session today on storytelling. So I thought we'd kick off with quite an interesting question right now, which is, in the age of disruption, how can storytelling help a brand differentiate itself amongst its competitors?
So it is quite challenging, to be honest. Times have changed, and the typical storytelling strategies don't work anymore. And we've seen over the past 25 years, storytelling has completely changed. Like, take an example of reality TV, right? When people see real people going through the problems in their real life, they resonate with it. Social media has given us access to behind the scenes of almost everyone and everything. So that means like people really do need real and authentic stories. So brands need to work really hard to make it really authentic for their audiences. Plus, allow the audiences to resonate with them, backed up by products that actually give them the right experience and the right quality or whatever the story is selling it. So I think it's a huge challenge for us marketers to come up with real authentic stories that are really, really in with the times, with the audiences, with the employees, shareholders, and there's so many stakeholders like working together to create it and to tell it repeatedly.
Just good points. Stephen, your experience?
I think for me is, even if you're thinking about this time where digital disruption is affecting every industry, if you go back 1,000, 2,000 years, stories is how we shared wisdom, how we shared information. We are programmed to listen to stories since the advent of time. It was the earliest form of communication before the written word. So we used to sit around and share stories around the campfire of, how do I keep out of danger? How do I find food? How do I build my society? And I think that's not even changed from today. But that's why we are programmed to like stories. And today you would think about, right, it's my update on Facebook. It's my update on Instagram. We're still sharing short stories about our lives. It's just the platforms have changed. But if you look at the science and the data that sits behind it, if you look at behavioral scientists, they say the brain lights up when it hears stories. There's 5 times more activity in your brain, and you're 10 times more, there's 10 times more chance you're going to remember something. So the way that you architect a story is really important, because it can translate a message and people can adopt and consume that message and take that on board. So I think if you go back to the way as humans, the way we think, learn, pass on wisdom, stories is possibly the fundamental way we've done that since the advent of time.
Absolutely, and I think, to build onto everything you guys have said, really, the thing about disruption, and certainly, disruption on many levels, there are new businesses coming into market that are disrupting, traditional sectors and really shaking them up and down, is it forces us to think about our purpose and our principles behind that purpose, which then become the stories that we take out so that we get the world to understand them. In my world of creativity, I think often what we see is brands taking their manifesto and pushing it out to the world. Well, actually, most of the people you're talking to aren't really interested in their manifesto. They're actually interested in your behaviors, and do it rather than tell me you're going to do it. And for me, storytelling is the way to do that, whether it's, and again, I love Stephen's thing about, social media and how that's helping storytelling. I don't think storytelling is necessarily a long-winded process. It can be very instant. And as long as the people who are creating those stories understand the purpose of why they're doing it, we can get to them very quickly and deliver very short-form stories that work on the behalf of a brand to connect with the audience.
And I think it comes down to how you architect that story. I mean, that's the challenge. And to talk about brand stories, you should be really talking about customer stories, personal experience, where as a person, there's a journey. What journey they're on, what obstacles they need to overcome. Can the target audience you're trying to influence, can you put them as the protagonist in your story? Can they, if it's James Bond that you like, can they pitch themselves as James Bond? If it's a CIO that's trying to understand digital disruption and the way that disruption will impact his industry, build a narrative which is relevant to that person you're trying to influence, and then take them on the journey with you. I think that's the key principles.
We've spoken a lot in some of the other sessions today around, and I think you mentioned this too, around authenticity. So clearly authenticity in the storytelling is a very important component. And then I think if you're looking to create an emotional and memorable impression with that customer in a way that makes them proactive towards your brand when they come to make decisions about which vendor they're going to choose for the particular offering or solution you're selling, what experience or advice can you offer to organizations that are on that journey of trying to think, how do I deliver authenticity through my storytelling, and how do I make my stories memorable in a way that makes sure it's going to stick with in the eyes of customers when they come to make those sorts of decisions?
So I think there's two elements of this. There is how you architect a narrative and a story, make it relevant, and there's the authentic piece. So let me do the first bit first. So I think as a CMO, there are 4 key tenets that you should check on the way you're telling stories. Is 1, is it relatable to my target audience? Can they be the protagonist in my story, as I just said a minute ago? Do they have the same challenges as the hero in your story? What are they trying to overcome? So that's one thing, being relevant to your target audience. And then secondly, it's going to be, is it novel? Is it new? Because that will make the sparks in your mind light up and be more attractive. We kind of embrace new things, new technologies, new stories, new visions. And if you can bring that novelty aspect into your story, there's a better chance that you can connect breakthrough and attach to the audience. And then thirdly, fluidity. So is your message not complex? If it's written English, is it basic written English? The best storytellers like Dickens, it's very easy to read his Great Expectations. Or is it shortcuts if it's video? If you've got Star Wars, that's what they use to keep you interested. So I think I've worked with this great storyteller at work who was a creative director in our consulting organization. And, fascinating stories, but he used these long words. And I was like, I don't really understand what you're talking about. But if he said to me, look, we're going to have a smelly lunch, I know what he means, right? That's a brown bag, lunch and learn. I understood that. But the complex word, I'm like, yeah, he sounds really cool. I wish I knew those words. My vocabulary is really limited. And I think that's one thing we need to be careful of is if it's you're in an industry or in the technology, you don't become a prisoner of that paradigm and you start talking about SEO, SEM if you're marketing, and you're talking to your sales leader. And he would be like, it's SEO and SEM, right? What's MPUs? So I think it's like having that easy narrative, to consume piece. And then the final piece is really tension. Tension, right?
Pause for effect.
Pause for effect. So Aristotle says that great storytelling is about the what is and the what could be. And the gap in between is tension. And it's, that as is and to be, how do you overcome those obstacles and how do you draw tension in? So you're close, the hero is close to overcome the obstacle. Or if it's Hugh Grant, he suddenly does something and loses the girl and then he comes back as the savior at the end. So it's that tension piece that actually becomes a good story. And in our world, if it's tech, it's, you could fail fast. Your company, when you're talking about digital disruption, the real risk of your organization going out of business in 3-5 years' time or even 12 months is very real today. So it's like, what's that narrative you need to embed in that story? So that's the piece. And
yeah, I love that, right? So right now I am in that tension, right? Because the company I work for, it is something and I see it where it can be. So in between, I'm spending most of my waking hours trying to tell the story to my internal audiences. And it's tougher than telling the story to the external audiences because they expect, like the external audience, like customers and all, they expect that from a brand like, what we work for, to come up with new narratives, new stories, which are believable and with all the good, sexy words. But internally, how do you change people, employees, shareholders, their mindset? How do you tell a story and convince them that hey, what you're doing is not broken, but times are changing. And you need to stay relevant. You need to resonate with the new generation that's coming in. And I work in the manufacturing sector, which is a very traditional industry. And things have been done in a certain way. And it's being done for the past hundreds of years. Nothing's changed, except the customers changed. The demands have changed. Their needs have changed. And the way you market to them, the way you sell to them has changed. How do you convince through storytelling that you need to change as well, right? Bring in new blood into the company, new ideas into the company. You're not just like, doing something for the sake of it, but you're future-proofing your own company because you're, getting ahead of time. It's really, really tough and challenging. And I actually, before this, I counted the number of hours I've spent just talking to people to create that story. It's 85 hours with each department. So multiplied by 19 departments, it's incredibly long. But I have notes and notes, and I don't take notes. But I have so many notes because everyone has a different story, different take on the story, whether it's employee, and we have a lot of people from every level, right? But what I was trying to find was one thing that is common, the commonality between everyone. And luckily, after endless hours, I have been able to find it. And now, I plan to build on that so that when the story comes out, everyone can resonate with it internally. And that's been proven a huge, huge, huge challenge. Hopefully, a lot of times, a lot of companies don't have to do that. But for a company where I work, it was critical, right? So before going outside, I had to do all of that internally. And that's taken me but it's beautiful because now that commonality that I found is something that people will resonate with and will tell that confidently, whether it's employees who live it day in and day out, whether it's shareholders who have a stake in it. So it's good. And I'm hoping when it comes out, the customers also resonate with it because I've also spoken to lots and lots of customers and made sure that there is a connection. So yeah, it's huge.
And I was going to say, there's a great book. So I spent a lot of time with Matthew Said recently, who wrote Black Box Thinking, which is about growth mindsets and fixed mindsets, and also a new book called Rebel Ideas. And he kind of talks about this fixed mindset and this growth mindset, that you should not be a prisoner in your own paradigm. And you're saying that some people, they're just stuck in their ways. The old, this is the way we did things around here, versus if you're in that fixed mindset, you know what, in this age of disruption, you're going to lose.
Yeah.
A new startup will enter your industry. They will take your market share. There's this new phrase which I keep hearing called disruptive capitalism. As an incumbent, the only way a startup can survive is by taking your share of customers. They're going to increase they offer better customer service. They're going to go after the gold of your customer base. You just need to look at the financial services industry today. Barclays, HSBC, they're scared of Monzo. Monzo did an advertising campaign, put a bit of fuel behind that. They're subscribing, 250,000 customers a month. Where are they coming from? The incumbents. The only way they can survive, but they've got a great story, a great customer service story, how they drive in change across an industry which has done things the way they traditionally have done. And in that kind of shift you're seeing is, in the banking sector, am I a bank today or am I a software company? And you can probably see that in any organization. Am I actually from a traditional business or am I a software company? And if you're stuck in that fixed mindset of, I'm just going to outbank you, I'm going to be the best banker. I shouldn't say that. The best banker that you can ever be. But if you've got a different mindset, saying, I'm a software company and it's about delivering better products and services to my customers, and here's the story and narrative of how I do that, that's a different way of approaching your business.
Just before we come on to you, you touched on a great point there, which we'll come on to in a second. Just wanted to respond to your point. This idea, I think, of when you think about storytelling and who is your audience, storytelling to what most people would think of as their audience being the customer is one thing. But in order for that story to consistently get through to customers, you've got to make sure that that story resonates with your internal stakeholders as well, especially your sales team, because ultimately they're going to be the people who will tell that story to your customers when they're face to face. So in crafting your story and thinking about how you engage and enable the rest of your stakeholder teams to deliver that experience to customers, come back to your own experience in a minute, I think internal stakeholders are hugely important to make sure that they're aligned. But I want to come back to you on customer experience in a minute, because I think we're starting to touch on that. But before we do, from your perspective, what are the key components of creating a really good, strong story that it becomes memorable and resonates with customers?
Well, I think just to pick up on the authenticity conversation, really, and it actually does pick up on the fact of how do you get the internal staff to galvanise behind it. And for me, authenticity is the key thing to any storytelling convention, because I'm not a creative director who uses many long words. And I often talk about the fact that we surround ourselves with friends that we trust, and we will go on a journey of life with these friends, the ones that stick with us for all of our lives, potentially. And what makes that happen? Well, authenticity, trust, okay? Now, in the world of B2B, we're actually building a circle of trust with a business that's going to affect many more people than just yourself. So you actually need that friend and your friends to start to unite for that to work properly. So I think that's like authenticity for me. If it isn't true and your staff don't believe in it and they don't galvanise behind it, you kind of don't stand a chance. To answer your question, David, about what makes a great storytelling piece of work, for me, I've heard the word resonate, and I've heard the word relevance today. I'm often in the conversation which is, well, is it this one or that one? Well, it's absolutely both. So relevance, the data that we're capable of mining now, we can definitely find the relevance in the audience we're talking to. But then we've got to make something stick. We've got to make something that opens people's eyes. And when we talk about disruption, what you often find that happens, and Dave Trott does a fantastic talk on this, which is actually everybody starts to yin when everybody else is yanging. And then actually what happens is they flip over, and then all of a sudden everybody's following each other. So it's not a story in the convention of a traditional story. There is no end for me. You know, and when you think about what happens in a good story, when I was growing up, it was always there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. When you think about how campaigns live now, there is definitely a beginning. There is definitely a middle. That middle, though, for me, keeps going. And then you have this loop towards the end, which is how do I keep that interest? How does that story change? I like this thought of living ideas, that we create campaigns that can live and breathe and change with the audience that we're talking to. So when we see them change, platform, we can go to platform because, again, not to be that complicated creative director, I personally think a great idea sits on a Post-it note. And if all of us don't understand that idea from that Post-it note, then we won't survive. So that's, I think, in a long-winded way, answers some of the questions.
We all like Post-it notes and creative spaces.
So we started to touch on the topic of customer experience a minute ago. Storytelling and customer experience, how important from your perspective is storytelling as an ingredient of that idea of driving a healthy customer experience?
I think it's crucial, especially this topic about authenticity that you just spoke about, because if you're not authentic, it could potentially damage your brand. So, I work for Dell Technologies. Our mission statement is we enable technologies to enable human progress. That is how smart cars become autonomous vehicles, how telesurgery enables better care for people, how digital cities will improve and revolutionize our lifestyles. But that's about also doing it in a sustainable way, but also about driving diversity and inclusion. And that's a key tenet to our DNA across the organization. And that's something which our CEO is driving as the fabric of our organization. And if that's not true, then that could damage it. And we kind of set ourselves some really key goals around that. So especially around sustainability, the one thing that unites all the products that we have is they've got our founder's name on it. He does not want to be seeing someone that fills landfill. So this year we've recycled or regained like £2 billion of tech. We've set a goal that by 2030, every product that is bought by a customer, we will reuse or recycle a product. For diversity and inclusion, we've made a goal that by 2030, 50% of our worldwide employees will be female. In the US, 25% will be Black or Hispanic minorities. A goal to say 50% of our staff will support employee resource groups, which is giving back to society at large. Now, that is driven through the fabric of our organisation. I mean, for me, I've supported the Prince's Trust through work. We supported their Millionaire Makers program, where over the last 7 years, we've raised 1.5 million for the Prince's Trust. I also support the Transformation Trust, so doing some mentoring work with them. You're empowered to do this in your staff. And if you're not that authentic about the way you're trying to drive that across your organisation, that could damage the brands. And there's 2 examples where this doesn't work, where you're not empathetic to situations. And you just need to think about McDonald's. They had an advert about a fillet of fish and a child that had just been bereaved by just lost their father, and the mother saying, well, this will cheer you up as in a fillet of fish. Now, that's not empathetic. It's not really authentic either. And that's, they had to pull the advert. It damaged their brands. And the other one is Pepsi. So you had Kendall Jenner taking a can of Pepsi to a policeman, and the backlash across social media that they were marginalising the fact. So the message was about driving, togetherness, peace across society, and they thought they just marginalised the people when they want to protest against things or social inequality, and that marginalised that, and that damaged Pepsi. So it's okay if you're authentic, but if you're not empathetic to situations and you're really trying to drive it just to drive engagement, that could actually be detrimental of your brand and the values.
Sakina?
Yeah, for me, customer service is key, right? I mean, customer service is the backbone of any company. Good customer service creates customer loyalty, advocacy, and then obviously we all know that it's easier to retain customers than to get new ones. So financially as well, like companies that actually have a good customer service and lots of loyal customers, they are really, really financially strong and growing. I have a really strange example of a small customer service. I ordered something from eBay. I ordered a small box of something, and it didn't get delivered on time. And I went on eBay and I said, I had a party, I needed to serve it, it didn't get delivered. And the very next day, they sent me 20 of those boxes in a box saying, with a big sorry on it. Wow. I was like, that's brilliant. I didn't even have to pay for it. That's brilliant customer service. And I never buy anything from eBay. I actually, just said, because it's available. It's amazing, like what the small company did. And probably I'm going to be customer for life. I'm saying this in front of the camera and in front of all of you. I've told all my friends that. And I said, you got to buy from them.
So because you missed a party, did you then put it back on eBay and sell it?
Nope, I did not. No, okay. I'm going to consume it for a Christmas party, But it's all about making sure. And I was very disappointed. And, I'm not that type of person who would go on social media and post that I was completely disappointed or I didn't like this coffee shop. My coffee was too hot or too cold. I was really disappointed because I was looking forward to it. And it was like serving my, guests. It didn't come. And I was like, well, actually, they put the address wrong and it went back to them. So they sent me another box the very next day, delivered by somebody who works for the company and saying big sorry on that. And it's amazing, right? I love it. And, I want all the brands that I engage with as a customer to do the similar service.
Well,
right?
then you become earned content in that sense, don't you? Because you'll now be a strong advocate
Exactly.
of that company online.
Exactly.
So that becomes really good earned content for them because you've reviewed them well.
Yeah.
Now, just to switch the discussion for a minute, we're talking a little bit about B2C experience in terms of customer experience here, but let's make this relevant to B2B for a while. From a B2B perspective, do you see organizations really keen to embrace storytelling as part of their marketing strategy? And are they nervous about how they do that and make it resonant and relevant to customers?
I think that's a great question. The truth of it is, getting back to what storytelling actually is, and we know that most CMOs in businesses, their current tenure is 18 months. We know that the pressure that they are being put under to get results. Well, actually, for me, we can use storytelling to drive sales overnight and then to create brands over time, if that's the challenge that we face together. So for me, it's not that different to B2C. We've got a couple of great clients that I've got the privilege of working with at the moment, and they are all about storytelling. They have realized that they have to shift their business from being a product into being something that affects lives.
Yeah.
And from that point of view, it's enabled us to start telling stories with them really quickly. And again, one of our clients in particular is such a wonderful person. They're helping us build these stories and they're augmenting them, and it's getting better and better as we start to build them. So I think the pressure from the boardroom is difficult. And I think if there were people in the board who don't understand storytelling conventions, that can stunt the growth of those stories. However, I'm a big believer in you can start your story with a product and a purchase. That could be the key point. I mean, I think, again, your customer service piece, that's storytelling right there. Pret do an amazing thing where Pret hold back certain bonuses from their staff, and they use secret shoppers to deliver that bonus to the individuals. So they are always on point with service. And then for me, that's just a fantastic way of using an organizational skill to get great customer service. And I talk about it when I get that customer service. So again, to your point, I become part of that army of people who want to go and talk about that service point.
I think in B2B, one of the challenges I felt in my experience talking to other peers as well is you sometimes don't use the word storytelling, because it's so, people feel that it's only for B2C brands. It's only for brands that are talking to younger people or who, in B2B, like we are serious, especially the industry I am in, right? We're a serious company. We don't tell stories. We get things done. We do things, but so using the right lingo, using the right, type of words that you communicate with is so important, because I've been burnt with that, right? This is marketing stuff. Like, we don't want to be involved in marketing stuff. Like, okay, but it's not just marketing stuff. Yeah. These words and these, I had to re-educate myself to I literally started using synonyms. What do you call this thing that marketing says, and what does an industrial person would call it? It's so difficult for us in B2B to start, not just to create those stories, but actually get internal buy-in. And when you go out and start talking about your story, if it resonates, everyone's part of it. But when you get started, it's really hard to get people along with you.
And you come on to another great point there, actually, because as you make the shift away from proposition-driven marketing activity towards more storytelling marketing activity, you quickly get onto the point of how do you measure the effectiveness and how do you demonstrate the effectiveness in terms of value delivered back to the company through taking a storytelling approach rather than a more hard sell driven approach. So what advice can you give to the audience in terms of driving that conversation with the leadership teams to convince them that there is a better outcome to be gained by being more resonant and relevant to customers if you take a storytelling approach rather than a traditional proposition-driven approach?
I think sometimes you can see it in the data. So what assets are being consumed? So if you've got a media partner, what's your top? So we use MediaCom, they give us our top 10. So here's your top 10 assets, and guess what? It's not the product spec sheet.
Yeah.
It's not the features, it's the benefits. It's what is the value that I'm getting as an individual? What is the journey? What is the story about the real person that has to implement the technology, and what is the risks of not adopting emerging trends or aligning to emerging trends in their industry? there are many obstacles. And I think really you can push on your partners to share those and then share that with your exec team. I think executives, you need to give them their credit as well. I mean, our president sits with the boardrooms of Europe. And I think actually sales are the best sources of stories. Tell me the difference it made to your customer. Why are they doing that? What is the outcomes? What is the journey that your customer is on? Why have they done it? I mean, we had we was at Gartner Symposium 2 weeks ago. We ran a workshop. Sometimes you can just do here's my business resilience, here's my backup and recovery software solution. Or you can tell a story about what happened to one of their peers. The fact that, imagine this, you are the CIO, you've been out playing golf all day with your Dell Technologies account manager. You've finished the 18th hole, you're in the 19th hole, and you pick up your phone. Sorry, I know this is your phone. And you see you've got 200 missed calls. 50 are from the CEO, 50 are from the CTO, 50 is from the CFO. What do you do next? You probably think something's happened. And this is a real life story. And he phoned up and basically ransomware had been hit by their company. It taken down their whole global IT infrastructure. And they were not able to transact. And he was like, so what would you do first? So we ran a scenario. So you're now the CIO. This is their journey. What would you do? We'd ring. Who would you ring? Well, actually, you can't ring anyone because ActiveSync is down, and they're asking you for 3 million quid to give you your data back. So what would you do? Would you pay the ransom of 3 million or 5 million to get it back up and recovery? I mean, then you play out a scenario. You put yourself in that story. So what's the implications for the CMO? Because you need to disclose your customer information. You've just lost everything. What's the implications for, we said to the CIOs, what would you do next? And they said, well, update my LinkedIn. Looking for a new job. It's like, okay. And it's quite funny. I was sitting between, there was a CIO which was like 5 minutes late, was doing scenarios. We was talking about this around the table. And this CISO was next to me and he goes, did you tell him what happened to us? And exactly the same thing happened to us. And he went through this whole scenario with this group of people that this is the journey we had to go on. We had no data. Our business literally stopped trading and we could not recover anything because someone was ransoming us. And then we kind of went through these scenarios and then you end up saying, well, this is how you would approach that. And this is what this customer did, which is a lot more impactful because you take them on the journey. And, but rather than just stand up saying, well, here's the features, here's the fact. Cybercrime has arrived, you know, all the scaremongering, but actually put in the person as a real person and play out that scenario, it becomes more impactful because people can understand that if they was in their situation, you would be pretty much, why is the CEO ringing me? Is he in the bar waiting for me to buy me a drink?
So I guess you can take some of that learning then, and the organisation that helped, whether it was yours or other ones, helped overcome those situations, then they can use some of that preventative action in their storytelling, and they can use some of the retrospective action in their storytelling for organisations that have been victims of ransomware. So in the last 5 minutes, I want to drop onto the point of personalisation, because we've discussed this a lot in various workshops today or discussions today. And the overriding theme was personalisation is important, but there's a fine line between where personalisation becomes invasive. So in a B2B context, in a storytelling context, how important do you think personalisation is in the next year, 12, 24, 36 months? Let's come to you.
So it depends what you mean by personalisation, of course, because I think many people think personalisation says, Dear Jason, at the top of it. Actually, personalisation is about that experience you create. The key thing, we're just talking about journey. I use the word conversation, understanding where you are in a conversation. The problem we have, certainly in the digital channels, is that we now have these echo chambers that have been created where we are being served things that the platforms think we might like. For example, I bought a candle 2 weeks ago. I now, if I open any of my feeds, seem to only want to have candles. The fact is, I bought one 2 weeks ago, right? I don't want to buy another one. My wife would love me to, but I don't need one until the new year. So it's understanding where you are in that conversation, I think, is the first thing that you need to know. and don't always be on sell. And I think it sort of plays into some of the stories that we've just been hearing, really, which is going, first off, when you're new, you want to say hello to somebody, then you want to introduce yourself, then you want to get them to like you. Potentially, then you're going to sell them something. And just understanding those things, for me, are the fundamentals of how we do our task. But personalization, to answer your original question, the beauty of these platforms are that they allow us to look at segmentation and how we tell different stories to different customers who are in different parts of that conversation. So now I'm often faced with a chart as big as this table, which starts to tell me the messaging against the individuals that we're talking to. Now, not individual by name, but individual by the type of person they are in that journey. So we start to work through these journeys to make sure the conversation is relevant. But just look at Netflix if you want to know what fantastic personalization looks like. Look at how they work.
You get onto the point really quickly that personalization in B2B is not the same as personalization in B2C. And it's not necessarily about, I bought that candle, so now you need this holder type thing. But I think there is a point about making sure that personalization understands the point at which that buyer is now engaged with you and what content you subsequently deliver to them.
Absolutely.
That matches either the buying point or their individual challenges and pain points. And if you can't match that story to that individual's challenges and pain points, and that could be different personas inside an organization, then I think your storytelling strategy is going to be flawed. So storytelling needs to take into account the people that you are talking to, the personas that you're talking to, the stage that they're at on the buying journey, and what's going to remain memorable to them when they come to make decisions about what vendors they're choosing to supply different services.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work in this area to look at data and insights. So 80% of the world's data touches a Dell device or piece of infrastructure at one time or another. But because we serve most of the FTSE 500, we've got a ton of data around what your infrastructure is. So what we started to look at is what data, what insights do we have about your infrastructure as the CIO? That's like one of our main points of contact. Now, we know, because we own the estate in the data center, probably more than what your individual teams do. So can we use that data and insights to tell a compelling story about why you would want to transform within your industry? What is the impact of not transforming in your industry? Would you become the Clinton Cards, which happens today? Or would you be the Blockbuster? Would you be the Nokia? If you're not thinking about these trends about your industry, and then linking it to data and personalize it to your own unique environment about, what's happening with your company. You need to modernize your IT so you can deliver new capabilities to compete with startups that are in your industry. If you don't reduce this technical debt as the CIO, there's one thing, you're going to be out of a job. And secondly, your company probably won't survive the next 3 to 5 years because people will start to be more agile, bring new products and services quicker to you and take your market share, like I said earlier.
I think we've got time for one last comment, Sakina, from you.
Yeah, I think personalization is super important in B2B. I think, I was reading this research that was done in the US, and each typical customer is bombarded with 4,000 to 10,000, between 4 and 10,000 messages per day. Imagine that, we are making people immune to all these messages. And from my perspective, our customers, especially in the B2B sector, they need to know that my vendor or my supplier or this brand understands me, understands my challenge. Otherwise, what's the difference? What's the competitive advantage? So I think, it's super important for us to personalize it, not become creepy, but really personalize it and making sure that we tell our customers that we understand you and we are there to help you.
And to back your point up, there was a stat that I read a couple of days ago that 5% of all branded content gets 90% of engagement.
There you go.
So that shows the value that some people are doing it really well. Vast majority, probably not.
And on that point, hopefully, there's a lot that people who aren't doing necessarily well today can learn from this fascinating discussion that we've just had, which could probably go on for some time yet. So thank you very much, guys.
All right,
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.